Joining me now is Stephanie Bastiaan, Head of Advocacy at Women's Forum Australia. Stephanie, good to see you. Thank you very much for joining me. Look, is it about time that these sporting leagues, like what we're seeing here, start fighting back?
Well, good evening, Danica. Great to join you. Yes, it is. I'm very pleased to see that these teams are fighting back. Parents are speaking out. Players are threatening to boycott. Teams are threatening to withdraw. But it's disappointing that it has to come to this in order to get action. We've had big changes overseas with protecting women's sport in the US. The whole gender issue in the UK has come to a head, and yet here we are still in Australia where men are identifying into women's sports spaces, so on and so forth. So well done to these players for speaking up and for pushing back, and I hope we see more of it so that we can get further action to protect women's sport.
Absolutely. And just on that, what does it say about sporting bodies in this country and the way that biological men are protected in these women's leagues?
I think that there's two categories. I think there are some sporting clubs that are ideologically captured and they're prioritising diversity and inclusion over fairness and safety for women and girls. But I think there is also an undercurrent of fear of litigation. The problem we have is that the laws conflict with each other, state legislation with federal legislation, and the Sex Discrimination Act does have provisions on the basis of things like stamina and strength, but they still have to prove that that is relevant to these particular competitions. It shouldn't be up to sporting clubs to have to face litigation in order to work out whether they can legally discriminate against males to protect female sport. We need clarity in the law. We need to reinstate biological definitions into the Sex Discrimination Act, and we need to scrap these so-called protected provisions altogether and have a blanket support for women's sport as its own category. And if other clubs want to be more open, they can have these open categories or mixed sporting teams.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And from my perspective, I just think it was a shame that this wasn't an election issue. I mean, I know Peter Dutton mentioned it very early on in the campaign, but he never pursued it and it never became a policy announcement like what we saw overseas. So, you know, and here we are, and this is just going to keep happening unless something happens. I want to ask you on another matter, a woman who underwent a sex change, including the removal of her breast to become a man before detransitioning to live as a female again, is now suing two doctors and Monash Health for negligence. Mel Jeffries claims that the medical practitioners did not take into account her mental health issues when they helped her change sex, and that those issues were made worse by the testosterone she was prescribed and by the surgery. Stephanie, putting this case aside, what does it say about the dangers of transitioning and the irreversible damage?
Oh, absolutely. If you get it wrong, it's devastating. You have young women who are being rendered infertile. They've lost their capacity to breastfeed if they go on to become mothers. I think this case really highlights just how flimsy the evidence is for the gender clinics and the way that they're operating. We've seen a number of cases emerge. There was a case in Melbourne where a 12-year-old boy was going to be put on testosterone without a gender dysphoria diagnosis. These clinics are operating on ideological basis rather than evidence. And the evidence shows that when people do regret their transitions, that the cause of the side effects of the drugs and the surgeries are irreversible and damaging and causing no end. I mean, Mel Jeffries says she now lives with PTSD. This is not good enough. The Cass review highlighted that there were issues that these practices should not be going on. The evidence is also here in Australia, and it's time that we had a national review into the practices going on in these gender clinics, because they're not evidence-based and they're causing irreversible harm to young people in particular.
Absolutely. They really are. You're spot on. Stephanie Bastiaan, thank you very much for joining me on the show this evening. Really appreciate your time.